I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1929. My father was from Lebanon and my mother was from Damascus, Syria. And they met in Brooklyn. My two grandmothers lived next door to each other and they introduced these two guys. And they got married and had myself, my brother, and my sister. And they had immigrated here from, as a matter of fact, my grandmother on my father's side, her husband died in Lebanon, and she brought the three boys to America. And she was a seamstress, and she worked in the garment center. My father and two uncles all worked in the garment center doing various things. And you know, that's how they made a living. One of the things that I remember is working for Mr. and Mrs. Feinstein, who had a little dry cleaning store. And I remember walking down the street, and I walked into the store, and the radio was on, and the announcement that President Roosevelt had died. I remember that. That was it was very hurtful, because I had been listening to him a lot. I remember standing outside of our home, which was up the street from Fort Hamilton. And we had Australian soldiers, Italian soldiers, British soldiers walking up the street going into Manhattan on leave, on, you know, passes. And I got to see them all. You know, I remember their boots with these hobnails in them, and they'd walk up the street and you'd hear them coming. And so on. I also remember looking down at the Hudson River and seeing these victory ships facing upstream and then being gone the next morning on their way to England, and going through the submarine packs waiting for them out there in the Atlantic, and not too far out. That was a big remembrance for me, watching those ships be there at night and then gone in the morning. I was in high school, and I had been planning on joining the Marine Corps when I got out of high school. But I met this gentleman who came back from the Second World War, who went back to high school. And when we were talking, and I told him what I had been thinking of planning on doing, he said, no. He said, you don't want to do that. He said, wait till you're drafted and go airborne. Which is what I did. I was going to have a problem with my parents. I know that they would be upset with me, you know, and the draft gave us no choice. So I was able to go in with a good heart. You know what I mean? I wasn't defying parents, and yet here I was going into the service and then going into the airborne. What happened was, he said, I got to Fort Devens, was inducted into the Army there, and this one afternoon we had a little time off, and they sent us into this big, huge hall. And to the left of the hall, standing there, was a kiosk with maybe 6 or 7 paratroopers there. and they were starched and spit shined and the whole thing. And I went over and I said, "How do I do this?" He said, "Well, just sign here." And I was on a train to Fort Bragg the next morning for basic training. Went to basic training, then went to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And from Fort Benning, they sent me to Fort Lee, Virginia for rigger school. And I was packing parachutes and inspecting troops as they got onto airplanes and dropping heavy equipment out of C-119s. Out of the back end, we'd load them with howitzers and 3/4 ton trucks, and we'd drop them and then go in after them, jump in right after them and recover them. And that was a lot of fun. Fort Lee, Virginia, back to Fort Benning, Georgia, and to a service company which we were, packing parachutes and doing maneuvers and so on and so forth. One maneuvers that was called Longhorn, and during that maneuver we made some jumps, and the jumps were horrifically bad in that the winds were so strong. We jumped at 35-mile-an-hour winds, and a lot of people were hurt, and it was really not good. But we managed to, survive. 200 or so people were hurt badly. We went back to Fort Benning, Georgia, and spent the rest of my time there in the Army. I had put 2 years in, and it was a wonderful 2 years. I went airborne, and they held us back. A lot of the people that I went into the Army with went to different organizations, and those organizations were sent to Korea. Some of them didn't come back. Some of those people. One young man, he went back, was there a week and lost a leg and came back home.
What do you remember hearing from your friends about Korea?
That it was very cold, that it was miserable, and I felt very fortunate in not having to go there. We were going to go to Europe, and they kept putting us off from going to Europe. But we were going to go to Korea. We never went to Korea. I put 2 years in, and it was uneventful, and I was very happy about that. Margaret Mary, I call her Sister Margaret Mary when I want to tweak her a little. She came in I was working at the golf course. I used to caddy, and then I was working I worked in the pro shop. She came in for golf lessons, and we met. And it was first love for me, and we've been with each other for the past almost 65 years. We have 2 sons, Paul and Robert. Our gift to the planet.
Who's in the service?
The oldest, Paul. When he decided to go into the Navy, I said, "Paul, why do you want to do this?" He said, "Well, I don't want to be in the corporate world." Well, I said, "You're joining the biggest corporation in the world. Are you kidding?" He says, "No, I know, that's what I want to do." I said, "Well, okay, go for it." And he did. And he went in, went to officer candidate school and became an officer. An ensign, was on a couple of ships, and came back and went to the War College and worked there for a while, and retired after 32 years as a captain. And my youngest son, Robert, worked for Dick Clark for 10 or 12 years personally, and then went to work for Lionsgate, and has been there for quite a long time. He's a vice president at Lionsgate. And, he's got 3 kids, and my son has 3 kids. They both have 3 kids. I went to a school for dental technicians, and I became a ceramist, and I worked for one company in New York who sent me to Beverly Hills, and I worked there for about 17 years in that one company, and then went to work at SC at the dental school, working with the students, the professors, and postgraduate students and foreign students. And I was doing all of their ceramics, cosmetic dentistry, restorations, all in porcelain. And I was in at the beginning of the porcelain to fuse to metal, the beginning of that era. And I was a dental technician for over 50 years, a ceramist. I had my own business. I worked there and then left the school, and we lived in Malibu. I had my laboratory in Malibu, and I had one up here in Ventura. I was working 2 laboratories, and I was able to send 2 kids to private school in Indiana, and I was working very, very hard, many, many hours a week, and it was worth it. I had a heart attack, and I didn't do anything for 6 months, and then I went to work for another dentist, low pressure, worked for him for 10 years, and his son came into the practice and it didn't work. So what happened was, that was interesting, I had gotten a call from friends in Florida. I had been in the Army with him 50 some odd years ago, and they called me and said he was not doing well, and could I come down and see him? So I said yes, I would, and I told my employer that I needed a week off and I would be back on the next Monday. She said, what about the work? I said, not to worry, I'll take care of it. So I did leave, went down there, spent a week with him and his family. I came back that Monday. My laboratory was all torn up and all of my stuff was put aside, and they had decided they didn't need me anymore. I said, oh, that's wonderful, you know? My friend died 2 or 3 days after I left, after I got back. And I felt really good about him. We had been in the Army together. He was the one that talked me into going to rigger school. And he had been a B-17 pilot in the Second World War. Came out of the service, couldn't find a job, so he rejoined the Army. And he went in as a master sergeant into the 82nd Airborne Division, the 504. And that's where I was. I was with the 504 and the 508. And I just got bored. And my wife and I had to go to the Hall of Administration, and I saw these 2 people standing outside, and I talked to them, and I said, how do you like doing this, and so on. He said, oh, it's good, it's fun, no pressure, and so on. I said, well, how do I become a part of this thing? He said, well, the office is over there, and he told me County Square Drive was here at County Square Drive. It was Garda at the time.
So how long have you been here?
10 years. They hired me at 80.